Hello and welcome. I first of all want to say a massive thank you. The engagement that we have had to this research project has been completely overwhelming. Charlie Martin from the Anti-Greenwash Charter will go into this in a bit more detail in a minute. But first of all, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview. We've had well over 450 people respond to the research that we did. And on this webinar alone, we've had almost 1,000 people register, and I can see now the attendees are climbing and climbing and climbing, which is great. First of all, I wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into why we're doing this. Why, as a brand and an event of Futurebuild, do we feel that this is important? So last year's event, we launched our campaign, which was that we were going to take a stand for a better built environment. We feel as an event, we've got a very clear mission, and that's to create a better built environment. We're committed to fostering innovation, championing sustainability, and nurturing that collaboration across the built environment, because we believe that real change comes from that. So last year, as part of that, we launched our Walk the Talk and campaign. It was about Futurebuild taking a stand for a better built environment. And if you attended, you would have seen this, you would have picked up one of our badges. We had over 5,000 people give us pledges on what they would do to take a stand for a better built environment. And as an event as well, we really looked into the sustainability and the carbon footprint of our own event. We removed our aisle carpets and took almost 28 tons of CO2 away from the event. But now we want to go a step further. And so as part of our mission and our values, we want to stand firmly on the side of the supply chain. We understand the complexities and challenges you have in marketing of products, solutions, and innovations. And we believe for the industry to truly evolve, green claims must be substantiated by evidence. And so that's the reason behind our partnership with the Anti-Greenwash Charter and why we felt doing this piece of research was really important. So in a minute, I'll introduce Charlie Martin from the Anti-Greenwash Charter that will delve into the results from this survey and research. But first of all, I just want to let you know that after this webinar, all of we will give everyone the research report that will be delivered to your inbox, and this webinar will be on demand as well. So let me not delay things any further. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Charlie Martin.
And good afternoon, everyone. Martin, first of all, a big thank you for that lovely introduction. And as Martin alluded to, it's absolutely fantastic to be joining everybody here today. I must just say a big thank you to you for taking the time to join this webinar and to run through all things greenwashing with us over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. It would be remiss of me, though, before diving into kind of the structure of today's session, if I didn't mention Hettel over at Futurebuild. She's been absolutely fantastic putting this event together, and I just wanted to shine the light on her. So thank you, Hettel, for all that you've done. So guys, in terms of the structure for today's session, there's kind of three parts to it. The first, we're going to take you through and explain a little bit about kind of who we are and what we're doing here at the Anti-Greenwash Charter, which will hopefully give you guys a little bit more context as to why the relationship with Futurebuild kind of has been such a good fit and kind of what's led us to work together. What we'll then do over the course of the following 15 minutes is just give you guys some real headline, top headlines essentially from the research that we did with Martin and his team earlier in the summer. As Martin alludes to, it will be very top level because the full report will be made available to you after today's session. And then the final 15 minutes, what we're going to do is essentially try and do a bit of a polling / sort of roundtable-esque session where there are actually some kind of key questions that came out of the research that are sort of our next steps and our next questions that we really need to look to address. So we're hopeful that you guys will participate and get involved in that, sharing any thoughts and comments that you have on those particular questions in our chat / questions function here on the webinar, and obviously providing your poll responses too, so that we can sort of garner impressions of relating to those questions. So that would be really, really helpful if you guys don't mind getting involved. The final thing to say is that this is the very first webinar that I've ever done. So obviously some slight nerves. So if you bear with me as I run through things, I'd very much appreciate it. But if I now take you through and begin to take you through my slides, Hetal, I don't know if I can have access. Brilliant. So guys, here today, as I say, to talk about obviously greenwashing, its impact on the built environment, and to have a look at kind of some of the truths that we have unearthed, and also talk about some of the risks. But before I do that, I just wanted to start by obviously introducing ourselves and the guys behind the Anti-Greenwash Charter. So actually here today, I'm Charlie. I'm obviously one of the founders of the Anti-Greenwash Charter. I've got Michelle and Charlotte who are also here with me. And really, this all began for us back in 2021 when the CMA came out with their report, which I'm sure many of you were aware of at the time, suggesting that 40% of all sustainability-related claims made online could be construed as misleading to consumers. And as marketeers, we were faced with an interesting challenge here, because we had a number of clients who weren't greenwashing, who weren't carrying out any particular malpractice, but they saw this as a growing issue and something that they really wanted to get upstream of and do something proactive in order to position them and their brand in the best possible way, and to sort of promote themselves to their stakeholders as implementing best practice. And crucially, to reassure their stakeholders that they were, as an organization, actually implementing effective, well-managed marketing practice and procedure. And so what that got us thinking about is, well, what could we possibly do with those clients that were facing this challenge? And really the thing that we came up with is that they needed to open up about how they, as an organization, were approaching their marketing practice and procedure. And this was something quite novel to those clients that we were speaking to, because essentially they had never really put down on paper exactly how they, as an organization, maybe managed their editorial processes, or how they used particular definitions when it came to particular green terms. And so really this was the starting point. We said, look, could we get these organizations to really open up in terms of how they go about communicating? What that then led to was the foundation of the Charter, which was to think about, from our perspective, what are those key, absolutely fundamental principles that we believe underpin, an effective brand position for an organization that is committed to mitigating against greenwashing occurring, and ultimately trying to do the right thing, essentially. And that really for us came down to transparency, accountability, fairness and honesty. And these are the founding principles that all of the signatories of the Anti-Greenwash Charter commit to when they become a fully certified signatory. But the next question for us was, that's all good and well, and it's sort of fantastic that everybody's got all the best intentions, but how do we actually deliver that? What is it that we can do to help support organizations manifest those principles in the way that they do things? And what we came up with was a three-stage process that we felt would enable any organization to essentially be able to promote themselves as behaving responsibly when it came to their marketing communications. And that first step was to carry out a full review of their current practices and procedures. And what that looks like is looking into, well, what are the editorial processes that are currently at play within the organization? What are the list of key glossary terms that this entity are using in order to describe the green credentials of their products or services? What is the internal training processes that go on in order to ensure that any new member of a marketing team is fully informed about how that organization goes about ensuring responsible comms? These were some of the themes that we implored our new signatories to essentially look at. So having conducted that initial review, and I have to say, from our point of view, carried out obviously an analysis of whether or not there are any outstanding issues with the ASA, whether or not there are any kind of legacy concerns over any unsubstantiated or poorly defined claims that were made previously. For us, that then enables a signatory to move forward with the second stage of the process, which is essentially to publish what we call a green claims policy. And again, this was very much inspired, admittedly, by the Green Claims Code that was developed by the CMA. But essentially, the Green Claims Policy was this idea of, as I alluded to before, organizations putting down onto paper, onto a published document, all of those key practices and procedures that they were going to commit to as an organization in order to ensure that they're employing responsible comms. And so again, the Green Claims Policy details all of the definitions that they use, whether or not that's what carbon neutral means to them, what eco, what green, etc. All of these key terms, what do they actually mean to that particular entity? Alongside things like their editorial process and how they go about training internal staff, etc., etc. So the key point was that this was the open book moment. This was the moment when our signatories were encouraged to actually publish and to share exactly how they go about implementing effective practice. And then the final sort of stage in the process was to allow independent verification. So again, it's all good and well organizations putting down onto a policy, that this is what they were going to do in order to behave appropriately, essentially. But what they needed then was an independent third party, the Anti-Greenwash Charter in this case, to come along and essentially verify that, yes, this organization, having created this green claims policy detailing these practices and procedures, has effectively implemented those practices and procedures for these particular campaigns. And therefore, from our perspective, we can certify that this organization has behaved appropriately. And so this is really the third element of what we do. And essentially what we ask our signatories for is evidence of where they've managed to implement, or evidence of where they've implemented all of those practices and procedures for particular campaigns throughout a 12-month license period. And essentially by going through this entire process, we feel that this is at least a contribution towards dealing with the issue of greenwashing. Now, I think it would be important for me to make this point at this stage that we are in no way saying that allowing us to independently verify that an organization is implementing effective marketing practice is the whole story when it comes to dealing with greenwashing. And we totally acknowledge that there's many other things that need to be factored in, but we felt that this was a good contribution to a brand's overall activity when it came to dealing with the problem of greenwashing, and to essentially, as I alluded to before, get ahead of the issue and be proactive when it comes to informing stakeholders about exactly how that organization operates. We've been fortunate that I think to date, having launched the Anti-Greenwash Charter at the beginning of 2022, we've had just over 60 signatories who have either been through the entire process with us or are currently developing their green claims policies. And it's really interesting seeing the kind of breadth of organizations that have got involved. We've worked with trade bodies, we've worked with architects, designers, developers, and sort of everything in between, product manufacturers. It really has sort of hit a chord, I think, with numerous types of organizations from across the built environment, which has certainly been a very positive thing from our end. I think this was just a quote I just wanted to sort of highlight for everybody around one of our signatories who actually has been through the entire process of effectively what creating a green claims policy actually did for them, in terms of asking them or encouraging them to think really clearly and deeply about actually how they go about communicating. And I think from our perspective, that's been, if nothing else, that's a fantastic thing to see happening, that more organizations, instead of just simply suggesting, oh, we've just always done it that way, or we've never really thought about exactly how we do it, we just do it, which is some of the bits of feedback that we initially had. I think actually sitting down and properly going through these things can be very revealing from an internal perspective, and then crucially, as we've alluded to, can be very impactful from an external point of view in terms of engagement with stakeholders. So I'll leave that there. You'll be very pleased to know that that's the end of the sort of the pitch of the charter. So thank you for letting me kind of introduce ourselves and go through it. Obviously, if anybody is interested in exploring our process a little bit more and how we can go about sort of providing value through the work that we do. We'd absolutely love to speak to you guys further. I know that as part of the webinar, those that have agreed to kind of receive ongoing comms from us have already signed up to do so. So hopefully we can have a further conversation. Anybody who having seen what I've just been through thinks actually this sounds more of interest, then please do head to our website, anti-greenwashcharter.com, just to check out exactly what we're doing and how we're doing it. But as I say, that's the end of the pitch. You'll be very pleased to hear. But thank you for letting me go through it. So moving on to the really interesting stuff. So here we wanted to talk about, as I say, the piece of research done with the guys at Futurebuild. I think the first thing I just want to pick up on, and it kind of Martin alluded to it in his initial intro, is just what an alignment we felt that there was with the guys at Futurebuild. Working with Martin and his team, it's clear that they are really passionate about, as they say, walking the walk and doing the right thing. And that's really played out in how committed they've been throughout the process of us working together on this piece of research. So just wanted to highlight that again of what the experience has been like with the guys. I know that, again, most people will have access to the full report either before this session, or they'll be sent it to them, sent it via email post-session. If anybody would like to find it on our site, because it's on there as well, it's at the anti-greenwashcharter.com/greenwash research. So feel free to download it from there should you wish. Right, let's get on with the research itself. So Martin again alluded to the fact that the research itself took place in August this year. And we were absolutely delighted to have, I think it ended up actually being around 430 respondents, but we sort of settled on the number of 420 to actually process the data. It was brilliant. We had organizations from literally every corner of the built environment sector. We had architects, we had developers, we had product manufacturers, we had charities, we had trade bodies, we had and everything in between essentially. So we're really pleased with the breadth, and obviously that breadth was fascinating because it really allowed us to pull together views and opinions from across the built environment. And what was even more interesting was the fact that there were some very common and key concerns that came out of it, irrespective of maybe the subsectors in which respondents came from. And obviously I'll go through some of those now. So yeah, overall we were very impressed with the kind of breadth of the research response. And obviously anybody on this webinar today who contributed, thank you very much for doing so. But now just to head on to some of the kind of key highlights from the research. Now, I've already mentioned this is just a very top level look at kind of some of the key elements. The full report obviously goes into things in a lot more detail, but let me just pull out some of the key bits. And the first key element for us, and I have to admit, when we sort of put together the survey, there was a slight bated breath with we're not even sure if the built environment, how people actually view greenwashing. Is it a key issue? Is it a problem that is causing us to fall back, etc.? And obviously our intuition suggested yes, but it was very good to hear that actually played out to be the case. So 90% of all respondents believe that greenwashing was a fundamental problem that was affecting the built environment sector. I have to admit, slightly struggle to understand what the other 10% perhaps were thinking, but that's for another day. But I think the key point was that, yeah, greenwashing was seen as a problem. In terms of how that problem manifests itself and in what guise that problem plays out, the key area was around the reputational damage that could result from being found to be greenwashing. The negative headlines, the press, the media pickup that comes from as a result of being found to be essentially disingenuous in terms of those claims being made inappropriately. So that was kind of the key issue, with 74% believing that greenwashing and being found to greenwashing can lead to a fundamental loss of reputation for that particular organization. What that actually then means in real terms, in commercial terms, was what we were really interested in next. Was we understood the problem, we understood that it was the loss of reputation that was a key concern, but what does that actually mean in real terms? And what was fascinating was to see the impact that greenwashing ultimately had upon organizations feeling comfortable about another entity being in their supply chain, with 57% suggesting that they would actually remove a supplier completely from their supply chain if they were found to be greenwashing. And again, for us, that's just highlighted the real world consequence of getting this stuff wrong. It wasn't all doom and gloom though, and I definitely want to sort of finish with I think a positive or really an opportunity, less of a threat and more of an opportunity. And that all centers around money and centers around the value that organizations were suggesting that they were going to place on products and services that ultimately were positioned in a certain light. And that was with 72% of all respondents suggesting they would pay a higher price for a product or service that had its claims rigorously verified. That was the particular terminology. So again, that was a very encouraging figure to see. Now we will, at the end, as I mentioned, be taking on sort of our further additional questioning that the research bore out. And this is something that we do want to interrogate in a kind of practical, on a practical basis, because one of the bits of feedback that we got is that there was a sense that people say one thing when it comes to paying a higher price for maybe a substantiated product or service, but actually how does that play out in reality when the bottom line is well and truly in mind. So anyway, we'll come back to that one at the end. So those were the kind of the key fundamental highlights that bore out of the research. But now I just want to talk about some of the kind of key issues that were identified in the research when it comes to greenwashing, in what form people felt greenwashing was most prevalent and impactful within the built environment. And the first was all around suspicion, and suspicion that was gleaned from ineffective or inappropriate use of terminology, and how ultimately using certain terminology in a certain way would ultimately lead to an erosion of trust in the minds of stakeholders if it was got wrong. And I think we can all agree that this was likely to be the fundamental concern when it came to views of greenwashing within the built environment. But again, seeing it play out was good to see, in the sense of just confirming that. Fascinatingly, the following were the kind of key terms that people were suggesting were problematic within the built environment sector. I know, having looked at a few comments on LinkedIn over the last couple of days in the lead up to this webinar, that I think some of these are definitely the worst offenders, if you like. And as you can see, these were the percentages of respondents who suggested that these terms were used in a way that was often unclear and unsubstantiated. So again, there were many more, but these were just the absolute headline terms. But it wasn't just about terms that bore out of the research when it came to concerns around greenwashing. The other key concern was around use of imagery, and essentially the illusion that could be created through use of design, imagery, etc. Effectively, is another key form of greenwashing. And again, it was fascinating to see that concern around misleading use of imagery and color was a major problem within the built environment. I think we've all seen one too many green windmills and green roofs and all the rest of it in different bits of literature and online, etc., to suggest that it's just so widespread. It's hard to tell exactly what's right, what's true and what's not, and that ultimately is the major concern when looking at use of color and imagery. The third key concern was all around the sort of counter impact of greenwashing, which is the issue of green hushing, and the idea that organizations essentially would be fearful, for a better word, of essentially presenting their green credentials because of the anxiety around being found to be greenwashing, and how that actually is a major issue around stopping growth and development, because an organization who potentially is implementing some really sound sustainability practices and procedures, or has come up with some fantastic new innovation, because of the environment, the context that we as a sector have previously created, there's ultimately those concerns about pressing forward with the promotion of those claims for fear. And I think, again, this is obviously a major concern and something that we obviously need to be looking to address as a sector moving forward. And I actually thought, sorry, this particular quote from one of our respondents, I thought summed it up perfectly around concerns around the anxiety of greenwashing and how that stops people from sharing good practice. So I thought that was just something worth highlighting as well. So we've talked about some of the issues and we've talked about some of the headlines of the research itself. We also, during the research, were trying to sort of come up with maybe some of the things that organizations could be looking to do that people thought would be effective in terms of resolving some of these problems. And as we've alluded to at the very start of the presentation, kind of getting ahead of the problem itself. And the first, and quite understandably, was all geared around evidence and what you as an organization are doing in order to provide really evidenced claims or evidence for your claims that you're making about your products and services. And that ultimately, by providing that kind of evidence, that these can lead to substantiated claims that people can have trust in and feel comfortable about. And what was particularly interesting was then looking at the ways, the viewpoints on the different ways in which organizations could go about substantiating their claims and creating that evidence block. With, as it alludes to here, 49% of respondents suggesting that EPDs were effective in terms of providing evidence, life cycle assessments 46, and so on. I think what was particularly interesting for us with our anti-greenwash charter hat on was looking at the internal standards and how actually looking at what we can do internally in order to improve the way that we're seeing ourselves and ultimately others will see us is a key thing that organizations could be looking to implement. But again, lots of interesting stuff going on there. I should say that some of the comments that we had around EPDs and life cycle assessments did highlight some of the deficiencies in obviously those practices, those activities. But still at this stage, there wasn't necessarily a suggestion of too many other things that could replace them or improve them. But again, something that we might look to be able to open up the dialogue at the end of the session on. And then finally, the final sort of solution that we came up with was all around practice. And again, this was sort of music to our ears, I guess, from an anti-greenwash charter perspective, because that's essentially what we're interested in. So what was fascinating was that 44% had asked to see a verified green claims policy, which obviously is a cornerstone of the work that we're doing. And again, that really highlighted, I guess, that concern or that interest, should I say, in understanding, pulling back the curtain and understanding exactly how this organisation does operate. What have you got in place in terms of safeguarding, etc., to ensure that your comms are fair and responsible? And again, it was, from our perspective, great to see that figure come out of the research. And the final sort of solution, should I say, because I know I said final before, but the final solution was all around brand and having a way of viewing an organization's brand that it sort of encapsulated an honest and transparent position and fundamental view of the way the organization operates. I think this quote, again, that came out of the research itself, just sums it up perfectly. In that, no one is perfect. We're all striving, or most of us are striving, obviously, to try and make a genuinely positive effect on things and on the targets that are ahead of us. We are human, and lots of people there are going to be instances where people get things wrong. The most important thing is to own it, not shy away from and green hush oneself, but to continue to be proactive and to continue to try to promote the best practice that the organization's implementing. And I think this really, from our perspective, summed up really nicely what organizations should be looking to do from a brand positioning perspective. Okay, well, sort of managed to do just about sort of timing on that one. So thank you for hearing me go through the research sort of headlines. As I mentioned, we're now going to try and do a sort of a quasi roundtable / polling session. So I'm just going to read through some of the comments that come through relating to each of these kind of key questions. And there should be a poll that's just going to jump up now on your screen relating to the first question. So apologies if this isn't particularly slick, but you're probably used to that by now. But yeah, let me just jump in and see if we've got any particular questions or points for discussion. Let's have a look here. No, we haven't had any questions yet. Interestingly, just looking at the votes that we've got thus far for this one, we've got 51% of you have said that sector-specific organisations to define for that industry would be a good way for us to reach universal definitions, which is interesting. Rather encouragingly, only 1% have suggested that it's not possible and we have to define it ourselves. So that's a very positive, positive to see. With only as the second most popular response here being government-led interventions. So interesting to see that the majority of us are actually suggesting that it is our sector-specific organisations that need to take a lead on this as a key first step. Just give me one moment while I just come and look at some of these questions that have been posed. Bear with me. Okay, I'm just going to take actually some of the questions that we've got here. So Nina, sorry, I shouldn't say full name, sorry, apologies. Could you explain what you meant by misleading imagery? For example, is using a sunny forest glade alongside your environment page misleading? It's a really interesting point, Nina. I think sort of what we looked at in the research itself was really just a very top level of whether or not people viewed the use of imagery, inappropriate use of imagery, as having an effect upon consumer confidence, I guess, in the truthful nature of the organization's claims. So maybe difficult to go into specifics relating to that particular type of imagery, but yeah, that might be a really interesting kind of next area of focus for us when it comes to imagery, is going into a bit more depth and detail. But thank you for the question. Let me have a look here. I had a question here from Neil regarding the EU is thinking of legislating against greenwashing, taking a lead from recent legislation in France. Do you think new legislation is needed in the UK? Neil, I have to admit, I'm not fully aware, and certainly should be, of the recent legislation in France. But I think I can speak from our perspective at the Anti-Greenwash Charter and suggest that I think any new legislation that's brought in is obviously going to be effective, going to be worthwhile and hopefully effective in improving standards from that end. I think what we're looking at is looking at organisations viewing this as something that's worth investing in purely from a brand positioning perspective, and how actually being forced to act and behave in a certain way through legislation is great, but actually what else can we be doing from a brand positioning perspective to benefit from getting this stuff right in the first place, and that's where we kind of sit on that particular question. Sorry, just going through questions. Sorry, bear with me. Sorry, one second. So Carl has asked a question, how can a smaller company that creates a product from recycled materials for the built environment compete with larger companies that have huge budgets they use for greenwashing? It's a really good question, Carl. It's a really good question. I mean, I suppose for in a situation whereby a smaller organization has done something, you know, genuinely and truthfully impactful in terms of the way they've gone about developing a new product, you'd hope that the cream would rise to the top in terms of just, you know, the uncovering of that new innovation. I think when it comes to the larger companies, I think if you look at just the general opinion of that people have when it comes to organizations that are found to be greenwashing, what we can only hope is that more and more of these larger organizations that are found out in this way, that hopefully that really does you know, send a shock to the system of other larger organizations who might be prepared to continue to greenwash, and that the tide is essentially turning on people's acceptance of organizations behaving in these ways. And certainly from our perspective, that was kind of one of the reasons why we made it, wanted to make sure that the charter and having access to the charter was accessible for as many organizations as possible, by including, you know, a very much a tiered license fee model for any organization, for smaller to larger organizations, so that any organization that wanted to promote themselves in this way would be able to do so. But again, it's a good question. You know, I'd hope that the playing field will level out as things like legislation and obviously more and more high-profile instances of greenwashing occur and lead to better practice across the board. Guys, that was really interesting. I'm sorry I haven't managed to answer so many questions on that one, but let's move on to our second question here, which again was all around the initial insight that we gleaned from the report that 3/4 said they would see a loss of reputation as a result of being found to be greenwashing. I think the question that we'd like to pose of you guys is, why aren't we seeing more organizations doing more to stamp it out? So any particular thoughts on that would be interesting. And just to say, finishing on the first question, we did end up with sector-specific organizations being used to define terms for that particular industry as coming out as the majority of you would suggest that that's the way that we reach universal definition. So that's particularly interesting. But yes, if we move on with this second question. Which is fascinating already, just within the moments that we've had the poll up, we've got nearly 60% of you suggesting that we're not seeing more organizations doing more to stamp it out because no one is holding them to account, which again probably aligns well with the previous question when we looked at legislation and the impact that can have, but equally thinking about how we kind of internally within the sector, what we can be doing to improve standards. And I suppose, you know, again, just thinly veiled promotion of, I guess, what we're doing here at the Anti-Greenwash Charter. You know, we certainly view ourselves as one of those accountability partners for organisations that are choosing to work with us in order to have their practice validated by a third party. Interesting that number has gone up to 64% now. So it looks like that one is the most popular. Let me see if there are any more questions here that I can jump into. Bear with me. Sue has come up with a very good question, I think. Do we also need to change the public to recognise what is greenwash and what is not? Yeah, I think Sue, that's a really interesting point. A whole piece around education and essentially developing more informed stakeholders or customers for particular organisations is absolutely key. And I think, again, not doing a particularly good job of not talking about anything other than the charter here, so apologies for that. But again, that's what we were looking to try and do. We were trying to give the stakeholders of the organisation the ability to be able to inform themselves about exactly, what these organisations were implementing and essentially why they were doing it. And ultimately they were doing it to ensure that the customers were making fully informed decisions about purchasing their product or service or referring it, etc. So yeah, I think it's a really good point, but maybe a bigger piece around helping to inform the customer around identifying and ultimately avoiding organisations that have been found to greenwash would be a very good thing to do next. Okay, guys, so that's our second poll. Let's just have a little look at how we've got on. So, 63% have suggested that no one holding them to account is the reason we're not seeing more organisations doing more to stamp it out. So that's a clear winner on that one. And the final question that we're just going to finish on relates to the report insight suggesting that specifiers would pay more for a product with verified claims, verifiable claims. Be fascinated to know how you guys see that playing out in reality. As I say, we've had some anecdotal conversations with different people at different events recently that have suggested that that in reality it doesn't play out that way. So we'd be fascinated to know if that's the case with who we've got on the webinar here today. I'm just going to cast my vote. And interestingly, we've got a 55% of you so far suggested on occasion you've seen it be the case. So perhaps not an absolute, but yeah, suggesting that on occasion we've seen it play out, which is, I guess, encouraging. Interesting to know for those instances in which it doesn't happen, why that's the case. And I suppose that's why so much of this and so much of looking at this piece of research with the guys at Futurebuild has led to more questions and obviously a need to perhaps dive a little deeper into some of these areas to find out more. We'll just let that poll run for another couple of minutes while I just have a look to see if we've got any other kind of key questions that would be good to address. Let's have a look. Right, I'm trying to pick out anything in particular. I think what we'll do is we'll just pull up that poll now. And yeah, so guys, having looked at that poll, we can see we've got 60% of you have suggested that on occasion you've seen it be the case that that ultimately specifiers do pay for more. So obviously a majority, which again, as I suggested before, encouraging. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for providing that feedback. There's obviously been lots and lots of comments and questions, etc., that have been put in the chat there today. Thank you so much for putting those in there. Obviously, haven't had a chance to address many of them. What we'll look to do is we'll pull this together, obviously use some of the polling information that you provided with us today, which is super helpful, and look to come back to you and address any of those particular points moving forward. Obviously, it's going to hopefully have an effect on any further pieces of research we look to do too. So thank you very much for your contribution to that. As I say, if you're interested in finding out more about Charter and what we do, then please head to antigreenwashcharter.com. Yeah, just to say a big thank you for all the thumbs up that I'm getting in the bottom right hand corner. That's always nice to see at the end of speaking to yourself for 40 odd minutes, thinking, I wonder how this is going down. So thank you all very much. And yes, I will leave you now. Thank you.